Hey guys, Pixelpar here, and today we'll be looking at the signs and symbols that we saw in the Pokemon Sword and Shield trailer. Now, there's loads of them in the game, so I think it's only fair that we start from the very beginning and take a look at that opening scene where we zoom in on the starting village. Now, if you didn't know this was a starting village already, or you didn't watch our map analysis, there's a blue signpost right at the very beginning which clearly indicates this is the very first route. These blue signposts are probably going to be used throughout the game, and they're going to indicate the route number which you're currently on. So if you needed more confirmation that this is a starting area, there's your Route 1 sign. You can also see this sign directly behind the trainer in this scene, so we know that this fight here is taking place on the very first route in the game. Now, going back to this opening scene, we can see birds flying overhead. And while this might not seem that important, it is the only place in the announcement trailer we see them flying. We also see a fletchling on top of the wind vane here, and this is on the red house next to your starting home. If we zoom back out to the full view of the village now, you can also see the very same wind vane with a fletchling on top of the professor's lab. Birds are clearly significant in this area in some way. They're definitely here as they're nesting atop of the chimneys. It's possible that the fletchling is somehow linked to the professor, or maybe it's just a symbol of the town in general. There's nests all over the place, so they're definitely here. Looking at the town again, we can see there's plenty of other symbols. Here's the train station, and we know that's depicted by a railroad in a circle, and there's a train there if you haven't already seen it. We have the purple building, which has a Pokeball symbol on the front, and from our map analysis we already know that this is the laboratory for the professor in the area. At the back we've got a Poke Center, which is easily recognisable, and it's got a blue sign on the side which is a bit blurry here. Right next to the train station we have this sign here, and again this one's too blurry to make out. But don't worry, we will be coming back to these two symbols just in a little bit. Now, directly behind the train station we have this building here, which seems to have an M logo on it, on both the banner and on the door, and this could well be the Pokemart, and it seems to have some kind of display in the window. Could be vegetable stands or something like that. It's also worth noting that there is one more building next to this one, and it's got glass doors and some kind of writing on the top, but there's no symbols or anything to kind of indicate what it could possibly be. So we'll just have to leave that one for now, I'm afraid. The next area shown in the announcement trailer is this area with a vast open fields around it and a gym directly in the middle. The gym appears to be a grass gym based on the leaf logo on the front door, and the same logo is actually featured on the floor of the door. And we can see that more clearly from this shot here where the trainers are running up to the front doors. Going back to that blue blurry sign attached to the Poke Center in the first area, we can also see the same sign here, and this time we can clearly see it represents a bag. This might mean we can buy healing items from Poke Centers. Alternatively, it might just represent a doctor's bag. Either way, at least we now know what the sign looks like. And there was one more sign from that initial starting area, which was too blurry to make out. And that was a signpost next to the train station. Luckily, this fielded town also has the same sign. Well, kind of the same sign. Although they look the same in shape, the actual number of letters on them differs. This most likely means that they mean different things. Now, it's understandable that some people might think this means train. But we already know the train station is symbolised by a track in a red circle, and this building here doesn't have any of those symbols, so it's extremely unlikely that this is actually a train station. So what could these signs actually be? Well, we know that the Galar region's based on the UK, and in the UK we have signs which mark out the borders between different counties. They're also used to mark the entrances of cities and towns, and they look extremely similar to the ones found in Galar. Now, going back to the sign we found at the entrance to the town, it clearly has some kind of emblem at the very top in the arch, and then directly underneath are 4 symbols. Now, these 4 symbols most likely represent the name of this town. There are some smaller symbols underneath, but they're just way too small to even make out. And then the sign we saw in the very first opening scene, we know that's got more characters on it, but it's just too pixelated to even try and make out. For now, all we know really is that these 4 symbols represent the name of this town. Now let's take a look at the grass gym again. This time we're going to look at the handheld footage because the trainer gets a bit closer and we can see things in a bit more detail. On the left hand side you'll notice another sign. Now this sign here most likely represents that you're approaching a gym. The emblem atop of the sign is also seen on the gym doors, and in fact, that emblem is also used on the Japanese game logos. Now that's not all we can see in this gym scene. If you look closely at the glass doors, you'll notice that it also has symbols on. You might be thinking, this looks a bit familiar. And you'd be totally right. The first 4 symbols are actually the same symbols we saw on the town sign. There's also 6 new symbols underneath, and if we actually look at the sign on the left again, that's got symbols on it too. So what do all these other symbols mean? Well, before we get into that, let's look inside the gym. And yes, this is inside the grass gym. Do you remember the green leaf logo outside the building? They've used this in the arena. How about that green zigzag pattern leading up to the gym? Well, they also use that on the side of the arena. How about that red and blue emblem? The one that probably represents a league in some way. Well, that's visible here at the top of the arena too. And if you want even more confirmation, we now know what the town's called. And if you look at the advertisement on the side of the arena, you can see that it features the exact same town name. Now that's not all the symbols in this scene. On the back of the trainer's shirt we can see 4 new characters, and these characters could be an abbreviation of some sort, or they could even be your player's name, but that seems unlikely, seeing as using the in-game language. Now it's also worth noting that this is the only time in the entire announcement trailer that we see 2 identical letters, 2 identical symbols, side by side. Now let's rewind a little bit and look at this scene as the trainer walks into the gym. We can see on the sleeve of his kit, he's got that logo, that emblem again, and underneath it there's some more symbols. And these may look familiar, if you remember the sign outside. Now they're not exactly the same, but they're so closely matched that the intention must have been for them to represent the same thing. Every time we see these symbols, they are accompanied by the red and blue emblem. And we know this emblem's important, it's on the Japanese logos. We also see this emblem on the doors of the gym, we see it on the sign outside the gym, we see it on the kit you wear when you go into the gym, and we even see it inside the gym itself. So we know that it represents gyms in some way, and it'd only be logical for these characters, these symbols, to also represent gyms. But we know it doesn't represent this one particular gym, in this case a grass gym, because that has its own emblem, and that's a leaf, it's a green leaf. So what could these words, and what could this red and blue emblem actually represent? There's only one logical solution, and that's that these represent all of the gyms, and therefore they represent the Gala League. Now if you look at these on a character count level, they do match, but we know from this example alone that Game Freak haven't been consistent, and I don't think it's actually that important to Game Freak for these to translate or even one-to-one match English symbols or Japanese accurately. I think they're there just to kind of give it that UK look. Gala's based on the UK, text is loosely based on English, but I don't think you can actually take these characters and one-to-one match them. So let's look at the gym signs again. On the left, we've got this official gym icon, and this probably means this gym is part of the Gala League. On the top, we've got the gym type, and all gyms are going to have these. In this case, it's grass. And on the doors, we've got what we know is the town name, and then some more symbols underneath. And this is most likely the gym location. And that word along the bottom probably just means region, or something along those lines. Now, if you've been paying attention, you probably noticed that there's something missing. In fact, there's 2 things missing. And that's a sign with the town name on the left, and then the Poke Center, which we saw earlier, on the right. When you compare the 2 shots, you can clearly see there's supposed to be a sign, it's right here, and that's a wheelbarrow. In fact, it's the same wheelbarrow we see here, they've simply moved it along to replace the sign. And then the Poke Center is very visible, but it's completely missing in the close-up. Instead, they've taken this rock formation, which is the same as we see in the close-up, and they've simply shifted it closer to the camera, and then to the right a bit to cover up where the Poke Center should actually be. Now I've seen some people suggest that this is because we're coming to the gym from a different angle, from a different route. Maybe we're coming around the back, maybe we're coming around the side, maybe it's got multiple entrances, but that's just not true. We're looking at exactly the same scene here, You can see that the sun is reflecting off the gym in exactly the same location. You can also see there's a building in the far distance to the right, and these are identical between the two shots. That tree on the left, you see that sticky out branch? That's exactly the same. And then there's the 3 mountains directly behind the gym. You can see them in both shots. So I think it's pretty clear here, we're looking at exactly the same scene, but Game Freak have changed some of the bits around. So why have they done this? Well, they've either taken footage from 2 different development periods and mashed them together for this announcement trailer, or they just don't want us to see some of these elements up close. Maybe they didn't want us to know the town name. Maybe they didn't want us to know that these steps, right next to the Poke Center, lead round to something at the back. Maybe we could actually see that thing if we got close. And maybe that's why they've removed these 2 elements and replaced them with kind of generic wheelbarrows and rocks. However, removing the Poke Center does give us a good look at this rock on the right, and we can immediately see there's 2 kind of runic symbols. And they're on the mossy rocks, and it must be quite old, and you can see one's faded slightly at the bottom. When you look at the overall town scene, you can see one right here as well. There's even one really far in the distance, and it seems to have the same symbol on it multiple times. And if you look over on the left hand side, there's even more rocks. But these seem to represent like Stonehenge in some way. So maybe all these kind of fallen and mossy rocks are part of the town's heritage. Maybe they're from an ancient civilization. Maybe they're part of the story. Either way, they seem to crop up regularly in this region. You can see one here with the Pokeball. And there also seems to be this hillside figure, and it seems to represent some kind of mythical or folklore, or maybe ancient being that's most likely a Pokemon. And again, this is surrounded by those rocks, those tumbled down mossy rocks that also feature the runes that we saw earlier. And we're definitely in the same area. If you look at the map, you can see the hillside figure just to the left of the grass gym. They've even got kind of those Stonehenge rocks depicted here. So maybe all this stuff's kind of tied together. Maybe it's just random. Maybe it represents a legendary for each of the games and they're different based on the game you get. Whatever the reason, I'm sure you're sick of seeing this grass gym town. So let's move on to another one shown in the trailer. Now here we can see kind of a larger town. Maybe it's a city, and it's quite industrial. You see a lot of steam coming from all the chimneys. There's these moving parts all throughout the city. And the first sign we see in this city is this one right here, and it seems to be some kind of advertisement for Pokemon food. And in the background you can see all these different berries. You've got the Pecha Berry here, and then you've got a Lun, a Weepear. Over on the right hand side there's a Cherry, and then there's this Pomeg as well. And maybe this is a food you can actually buy in the game. Maybe you can use it to remove various status effects and cure all the ailments of your Pokemon. Or maybe it's just an advertisement put there to look nice. At this point we don't actually know. However, like all the signs in the game, this one too features those symbols and most likely kind of the characters, the text of the game in their own unique language. And this one seems to feature a word that's only 2 symbols long. So if this is actually English, the best place to try and translate this text from would be starting on that 2 symbol word. Now let's have a look at this building over here. It seems to be attached to some kind of bridge. And we know this bridge is actually a rail bridge because we see 2 trains crossing paths in the footage. So this building should be some kind of city train station, right? Well, if you actually look at the glass on the side of the building, we can see this kind of circular emblem here with a kind of bar going through it. And this looks very similar to the one used by the London Underground. Normally they'd just take this same symbol and they'd switch out the word underground with the station name. So for instance, it would say Baker Street instead of Underground. And this is used to get from different places within London City. So maybe that's what this station is here. But we know that train stations are already represented by this circle, this red circle with a track in the middle. So we should be able to see that somewhere on the building here. Now if we actually rewind and go to the very first frame, we can see half a logo up in the top left. And yes, it's a red circle. And yes, it appears to have part of a track in the middle. But there's also a white line coming from it. And this most likely represents inner city trains, like the Underground, to get from place to place within the city. And that's not the only interesting building we see in this city. In this scene, we see Shigeru Omori talking in front of what appears to be the main high street of this town or city. On the left hand side we can kind of see this building here, which looks like a Costa coffee joint, and we have those in the UK all over the place, so maybe this is actually a cafe. And the symbols on top of it, we've seen every single one of those symbols before, The second character, that was on the trainer's shirt, and all the rest are on the Gala League sign. So they're definitely reusing some of the symbols here, so maybe they do have meaning after all. Now if we look over on the right hand side, we can see another sign, and this one's black and cyan, and on it there seems to be a t-shirt symbol with a white outline. Now this is most likely a clothing store, and if that's true, then trainer customization most likely is available in Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. And there is more evidence supporting this. If you look at the shop on the right hand side, you can see kind of a green and yellow shop, and on it there's this kind of white cylinder. And this white cylinder actually has a blue stripe and a red stripe along it. And this is a traditional barber's pole, and this represents a place where you can get your hair cut. And if you look at the sign again, there's even a pair of scissors on it, so this is most likely a unisex hair salon, a place where you can go get your hair cut, dyed, restyled, all of those kind of things. And this hair salon just happens to be right next door to that clothing store. Very convenient if you want to customize your trainer, and you only have to go to one place to do both your hair and your clothing. It kind of makes sense that these two shops, right next to each other, would be two elements of the trainer customization. And there's loads of other things that we can look at in this scene. If you look at the building in the background, you'll see that it's got that gym logo on it again, the Gala League logo, which means there's a gym somewhere inside that building. And wherever there's a gym, there's usually a Poke Center. And we can see one on the left here. Although we can't see the symbol, we know from the previous Poke Center that the building is identical, so that must be what it is. And if you look up in the sky, there's this green sign or green screen on the side of this building. It's so blurry you can't make out what it is. But you must be able to see it at some point, else why would it be there? And last but not least, there's one more shop we can see right here, and it's next to the cafe, or what we think is a cafe. And luckily, we actually get to see this. If you look at this scene here, we know it's the same scene as before, but from a slightly different angle. You can see the screen on top of the building, train bridge, even the tower. Now have a gander at the bottom left. Here's that store, the one we were looking at before, and this time it's in full view. It's not blurry, we can only see the sign at the top, but that's fine, because we can see all the characters, all the symbols that represent what this store actually is. And if at some point we can work out what these symbols mean, if in fact they do have a meaning, then we'll know exactly what this store sells. It might not even be a store. Looking at the kind of signage on it, you can see that the O's and the O's of Flix have these kind of wheels around them. So maybe it's a bike shop, maybe it's a train station, maybe it's a sushi bar. It could be any of those things. One thing is for sure though, and that's that these symbols are definitely two words. You can see the first symbol on each of the words is larger than the rest of them. And something I see every time I look at these sets of symbols is that second word. It looks an awful lot like station. Now we do see another town in the announcement trailer, and that's in this kind of snowy, icy region. And we can see here on the right hand side there's a building with some writing above the doorway. And the writing's a bit blurry here, so we can't quite make out what it is. But we do get to see this in a close-up shot, and it's a lot clearer here. It's very clear in fact. And we can see again it's featuring these kind of in-game symbols, these letters, these characters, will probably make up the language for the game. Now if you look on the left hand side of the doorway, you can see this kind of billboard attached to the building, and this seems to have 5 characters on the top that are underlined. Now these are too blurry to make out, but they're probably the same as what's written above the doorway. And this is probably some kind of billboard for the establishment. And if you actually look on the right hand side, you can see another one, and this one's rectangular in shape, so it's different from the one on the left. Maybe this is a menu, maybe it's kind of like a star rating. Maybe both of these signs indicate what the building is. It could be a restaurant, it could be a pub, it could be a hotel, an inn or a lodge. Based on the sheer number of windows this building's got, I'm presuming it's probably some kind of hotel or inn. You can go here to kind of get away from the cold and stay for the night. Now this isn't the only interesting building in the area. If you just swing the camera around a little bit, there's a gym directly behind this kind of archway. And you can see the kind of pattern peeking through this little gap and the kind of curvature of the actual stadium. Over the top you can also see one of those supporting or decorative poles that all the gyms seem to have so far. And if we actually look at the map, we can see it's supposed to be this gym here. It's even got that triangular archway leading up to the gym. However, there is one thing slightly different. The symbol on that triangular arch. On the map, they've used the psychic type eye. However, in the in-game footage, this has been swapped out with a kind of generic circle with 4 blocks on it. So why have Game Freak done this? Well, they've either changed the gym type, or they just didn't want to give the gym type away in the announcement trailer. But that seems weird seeing as they put it on the map, so maybe the map's wrong. Either way, there are definitely more things to look at in this snowy town, so let's rewind the footage back to the very start. And on the right hand side here, in the very first frame, you can see there's a food cart. And on the side of that cart are these symbols again, and this is most likely the brand name or the type of food that this vendor is selling. And there's some smaller symbols underneath which probably form a description of some sort. And there's even some symbols hidden underneath that handle, exactly in the wrong place for us to even try and see them. Now, do you remember that inn we talked about at the beginning? It's here on the right hand side. Well, there's also another one, and it's on the left hand side of this town. And do you remember that billboard? It was on the left hand side of the door in the original one. Well, now it seems to be on the right hand side for the other building. And the piles of snow on the floor, they seem to be building up in opposite directions. And there is a reason for this. This may be the snowy, icy town, but it also appears to be the mirror town. Every single flag, snow pile, building seems to be reflected, and if you draw a line directly down the middle, it becomes immediately obvious. And it's not just this footage from inside the town either. If we actually look at this place on the map, you can see that it's got 2 entrances, and they're mirrored. There's 2 ways to get into this town, and maybe this is a dual type gym. Maybe this is both iced and psychic. And maybe the entrance you go through is significant in some way. Maybe the town or gym's run by twins, and that's why everything is doubled up. Now there are some more signs we haven't touched on yet in this town, and they're up here on the flags. First we've got this kind of castle symbol on a yellow flag, and then there's this crown symbol on a red flag, and then a gear symbol on a light blue flag, and then a flower symbol on a slightly darker flag. Now these are clearly significant in some way, and they could either be house sigils, or alternatively they could be kind of county symbols that represent different areas within Gala. Now you may have noticed that I called the light blue flag a gear icon, and that's because it resembles the icon that's on the gears in that Steam City. It kinda looks like the same thing. And then we have a town with a crown in it too. Maybe that's what this red flag is representing. And there is an area with a broken down tower, so maybe that's what the yellow flag represents? As for the flag with a flower on, I'm really not sure. It could represent the starting area, it could represent the area at the top with that kind of red gym-like building. It could be an area we haven't actually seen yet, but I wasn't able to find anything on the map which directly matched this symbol in any way. Now that's it for all the towns in the announcement trailer, but we do get to see some interesting signs and symbols in the other footage. And this scene here is one of my favourites. There's so much packed into it, and it's where the trainer's getting ready to go on his journey. And you can see directly behind the trainer's head there's this box, and it's got those symbols on again. And this is most likely some kind of storage box, and those symbols represent the contents of it. Now on the wall in the background we can see this poster here, and it's got a Pokeball on it and some stars, and in the bottom right corner is the number 21. Now this could be a hint towards a release date of the games, or it could even be the next trailer. It might just simply be a nod towards the 21st series of the Pokemon anime, or the 21st film. Right now we don't really know. Now over on the right hand side on the wardrobe you can see these kind of decorative stickers or posters, and these could represent loads of different things. They could be dual type pairings, so you've got electric and water, normal and psychic, or they could represent gym leaders or teams, or maybe they're just decorations and they have no meaning at all. Now if we swing the camera around here we can get a better view of the front of the male trainer. And you can see on his shirt he's got this red Pokeball logo. And this seems to either be a clothing brand or a symbol of some kind of team or maybe school. We do see 2 other trainers in the announcement trailer, and both of them have different symbols on their shirts. So it could be some kind of way of grouping people, like schools or teams, or maybe it's clothing brands again. We saw a clothing shop in that Steam City, but I just can't kick the feeling that these trainers look like they're wearing traditional British school uniforms. And the next piece of clothing we can see is the trousers, and they seem to have this green tartan pattern on the pocket and all the way around the back. Now, it's not just a male trainer that's got this. The female trainer also has the same green tartan pattern, but instead of being on the pockets, it's actually on her socks, So it's possible that this pattern somehow is important to the playable character. Maybe it's part of the backstory, maybe they're from Scotland originally. We'll just have to wait and see, but it's clearly present on both trainers. Now I'm sure you haven't missed this weird tissue or fabric poking out of the jeans of the male trainer, and this seems very odd, because as far as I'm aware, this just isn't a fashion trend. So it must be symbolic in some way. And if you actually think back to the very first thing we said about the starting area, is that birds, and in particular fletchlings, were somehow symbolic here. Unless this is a massive coincidence, this also seems to be linked to this whole fletchling thing. And if you actually look at a 3D model of a fletchling from the front, that crest under its chin is exactly the same shape as the fabric or tissue attached to the trainer's trousers. Now this could be a huge coincidence, but considering we've got the fletchling wind vanes and we only saw birds flying overhead in this particular area, I wouldn't say that it's too much of a leap of faith here. Now there is one more interesting thing in this scene here. And no, it's not the Pikachu plushie, it's actually the wardrobe, or more specifically, the reflection on the wardrobe's mirror. Now I'm sure we all know how mirrors work. This means that whatever's in the mirror here, in this case these kind of green rounded symbols, are actually on the left hand side of the screen right now. And we do actually get to see it, but it fades away as the camera slowly pans to the next scene. If we rewind it and stop it at exactly the right moment, we should be able to see exactly what it was. And it's right here on the left hand side, and it looks like a map, and we can also see those kind of green rectangular shapes with rounded edges that we saw reflected in the cupboard. But if we grab multiple shots and stitch them together and adjust the levels a little bit, we can actually make the map again and see it a bit more clearly here. However, the side on the left is still a bit too blurry and faded for us to actually make out. Luckily, that doesn't matter, we already have that bit, we saw it in the mirror. So if we just put that on top and adjust the levels, we finally have a complete map. Now, does this look familiar? Because it should do. It's Gala, and you can even see the 3 rivers that run through Gala. They're right here on the map. So what are these kind of rounded rectangular symbols actually showing? Well, let's compare the 2 maps and actually have a look. This very bottom icon seems to indicate the same area where we start off in the game, which is a starting town or village. And this might be representative of the town as a whole, or it might be your starting house or even the lab. Now the second icon is a bit higher up and to the left, and this seems to match up with this mountain that we see this kind of bridge running into. So maybe there's something inside that mountain we haven't seen yet, maybe there's another town. The third icon is on this straight river here, and we can see directly on this main big map, that's exactly where this steam town is. So that's most likely what this symbol represents. The next icon is higher up, and although it doesn't look that higher up, you've got to remember the main map is kind of skewed at an angle. And we can see on the left hand side there's an indent, and on the right hand side there's a nodule, and that's exactly where this crown town is. Now the next area is another example of how this kind of angled map distorts the actual distance between them. And we know it's this snowy town here because we can see the river just in front of it cutting through Gala. The second to last icon is kind of near the top and it's centered on the map, and it represents this front section of the final town, and we know that because we can see that the river runs just behind it, so it must be this front section. The very final icon seems to be behind this river that runs through Gala, and it also seems to be to the left a little bit, and it could represent something behind this final city or final town, or maybe that glass dome at the top. Now, all but the mountain have been major towns, so it's very likely that these symbols represent major towns in Gala. So could there possibly be a town in that mountain? Maybe, or maybe they represent something that's in all of these towns. Now there's only a few scenes left to analyse in the announcement trailer that actually contain signs and symbols. And one of them is this scene here where we see beach deck chairs next to what seem like snow-covered trees. And if we actually look on the map, we can work out where this scene's actually taking place, and it seems to be just outside of that snowy town, in a kind of beachy area where there's little islands and a mix of sand and snow. If we actually go back a few frames, we can see a sign directly behind the trainer here, and this looks awfully similar to public walkway signs found in the UK. In fact, it even seems to have a person walking on it. The other ones are a bit more ambiguous, and they're kind of like a blob with two sticks coming out of them. And we know they don't represent humans walking, so the only other thing I can think is maybe this is a Pokéride sign, or maybe it's indicating that there's Pokemon you can capture over here. The only thing I could find that vaguely resembled it was the Rotom powers from Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. The icons from those, the faces and the symbols, do look kind of similar in shape, so maybe it does represent Pokemon in some way. We can also see some interesting signs and symbols in this lab scene, and if you look on the right hand side there's this white planning board, and it seems to feature some kind of schemes for something. Now this could be a Pokédex, or it could be some kind of device that the professor is working on, we're not quite sure. However, right next to it there also appears to be schemes for something else. And this seems to resemble the Charizard's head at the top, and at the very bottom there appears to be possibly Charizard wings opened up. So maybe these two things are related. Maybe the professor's working on something for a Charizard. Maybe some kind of further evolution that's encouraged by using this kind of machine. Now next to this planning board is also a monitor, and it seems to be looking at 3 different things. And although they do use the in-game language, we don't really know what these mean, and some of the symbols aren't clear enough to make out. They're clearly monitoring something, and maybe this is related to that weird green screen we saw in the air back at the Steamtown. Maybe this professor's obsession with plants is all about purifying the air or avoiding pollution, and maybe he's monitoring pollution across different towns and cities. Now the very last scene we're going to look at in the initial launch trailer is this scene here, and if you actually look on the stadium walls, you'll see that Game Freak have put their own logo there, using the in-game symbols. Now before you get too excited thinking, this is it, we're going to be able to translate it, I don't think that's actually the case. If you actually look at these symbols and compare them to other signs we see throughout the game, for instance the gym doors, that bottom word doesn't really make any sense using those letters in those places. And then there's the Gala League sign we saw, that now says GUF EA, and there aren't many 6-letter words that end in AE and have E as a second letter that make any sense. And if we look at all the symbols we've seen in this trailer, there's way too many. There's more than the English language has letters, so that can't be the case. And some people might say, well, maybe some are capitals, maybe some are numbers, maybe some are symbols. Well, they're not, because we've seen capital letters and they were the same as lowercase letters. We've seen numbers and they were actual numbers. And we've seen punctuation on that advert in the Steamtown, and none of them were represented by unique symbols. So maybe Game Freak have just made a random alphabet that's more letters than the English letters. And maybe they've just put these symbols together to look like English words. Maybe there is no method behind their madness. Or maybe I've just missed something, and maybe they do make sense. Either way, I'm going to call that a wrap now. There are a few more symbols in the stadium, and I'll leave you guys to ponder them yourselves. But for now, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, then there's probably a button for that too somewhere, I'm not sure where. But for now, that's it. Thank you for watching guys, and take it easy.